From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Coming up, K-State's Dan O'Brien will talk about what would have to show up in this morning's USDA reports that would provide a spark to the otherwise bearish grain markets currently. K-State's Brian McCornack will follow to talk about the mission of the annual Summer Soybean Science Institute here at K-State. Science teachers from schools all around Kansas come in for 3 weeks of in-service training on everything soybeans. Information they'll then take back and incorporate into their classroom science teaching. Today's Kansas Wheat Harvest Update features Extension Agent Sandra Wick of the Post Rock Extension District in north central Kansas, and later K-State's Mary Knapp on Kansas agricultural weather, here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
We're glad to have you tuned in for Agriculture Today, our Friday edition. Well, as we venture into the grain market news, we wish it were more positive, but these trades are still reeling from the unsettled trade scene. Well, we'll get into that. We'll talk about the upcoming USDA supply and demand and crop acreage report due out within the hour and more with Dan O'Brien aboard, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. And there's just no sugarcoating it. The markets are absolutely struggling, Dan, with the trade issues that are real and perceived, actually.
When you look back at December corn futures over the last decade or so, you'll find a number of years when we've had what have been perceived to be pretty good crop conditions come up and no other issues coming into play, that the futures will start to decline a lot of times around the 1st of June. In one of those years, even a little bit earlier in that latter part of May. But as the crop gets in and there's not the perception of any major threats to the market, and in particular if we have been in a year where we have large carry-in stocks, again, not a lot of worry about supplies, the market, which at this time of year mainly focuses on supply issues. Again, if there are no supply threats, will tend to fall off. And this year, of course, we have the general negativity in U.S. agricultural markets having to do with this uncertainty about trade prospects. At least while things are on the table and there's a rough and tumble of negotiations going on, posturing and framing, or whatever you want to call it. If you start out with that and then bring in no perceived major threat to the crop yet, then you have markets like I think we've seen them in the last several weeks. And, just look across the board with the corn contract setting new lows, down on yesterday's close to 345. The most recent low that we've seen was 301 back in the middle part of 2016. So we're about 45 cents off those lows, but a new July contract low. The wheat contract actually has held up a little better than some others, and than corn and soybeans relative to historic lows. July wheat closed yesterday at $4.53 in the quarter, and our historic low over the last decade or so happened again in the middle part of 2016. We got down to about $3.67 and 3/4. Again, July-August time frame. So we're arguably 80 cents off those lows. For soybeans, closed yesterday for July beans at $8.80.5, and again within the last several days had gotten down as low as $8.40. That $8.80.5 number is about 36-40 cents off the lows of $8.44.5 that we'd seen again in the late 2015, early 2016 time frame. So we're within shouting distance of low prices. Then we come into a set of USDA reports that at times have been responded to negatively by the markets. I think that we're about to witness within the next hour or so an interesting study in market psychology because with the negativity that has come into the market, then if we do get just so-so news or something negative, does it go further, or have they already bid all that into the market with what's happened the last several days?
Let's take that in the other direction, though, Dan. As you look ahead to the USDA's supply and demand and acreage reports, what would have to show up in either or both to shake these markets out of their very deep funk right now?
Well, I think the pessimism that we've been talking about is expressed in terms of the usage numbers. For corn, the stocks number on June 1st last year was about 5.229 billion bushels. Expectations this go around are for about 40 million bushels more, about 5.268, with a low of about 5.04, a high of about 5.5. If we have stronger than expected feed usage and we get closer to 5 billion bushels, for that number, that would have meant that quarterly use coming into this report would have been better than expected. That would be a positive. For soybeans, again, we're just struggling because of the export issue, and have some decent idea of the crush given our reports that we have. Projections right now are for about 1.225 billion bushels. We were just below a billion last year for this same report. So a lot of pessimism, and really the root of soybeans problems has to do with these issues relating to U.S. soybean exports and the conflict with China. And again, market watchers around the world generally are saying that this situation cannot pass, because eventually, in a not-too-distant future, Brazil just won't have any more supplies. And we have had a short crop in Argentina. Eventually, the world, China, will have to come directly or indirectly to the United States to buy our supplies. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this unwinds itself over the next 2 or 3 months. And for wheat, actually the wheat number, stocks figure in June 1st last year was 1.18 billion bushels, projected to be about 90 million bushels less than that this year. And a lot of that having to do with a little smaller crop in our own state in Oklahoma and Texas. On the acreage side, we'll be watching to see how the acreage figures work out for soybeans in particular. They were projected to be about 89.7 million acres by the trade. They were at 88.9 last year. And here, if that number with some of the planting issues that we've seen up in the northwest Iowa, parts of Minnesota, et cetera, if we've delayed or had problems with soybeans, that could give us some benefit. And of course, we'll be watching the corn number as well. 88.6 million acres projected by the market. I guess my own thoughts on acreage figures are that, yeah, they're good to know, but higher yields or lower yields can ratchet up or ratchet down the production number off of those acres so much that, again, we need to watch the acreage figures. They'll make a difference, but we're really watching yields is what we'll be watching. I think for grain sorghum, I think we in Kansas are really going to be curious about the grain sorghum number. Last year, planted about 5.6 million acres, projected in March about 5.9, and projecting that to be a little bit lower here in this report. So we'll see. So you started off the discussion by asking what could really change things. Well, anything that would indicate more usage, particularly feed usage, than we had expected, that would be a positive change. And any issue that would come in and give us some lower crop acres than had been anticipated. And again, up in those northern Corn Belt areas, it's possible we could see that. That would have some impact, but I just don't see a 2 or 3 million acre shift. I think we're more looking at 100,000, 500,000 or so acreage changes than had been expected, and maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe we'll see a tremendous change, but we just haven't heard the market reports or the in the field reports yet to indicate that would be happening.
Well, all of those numbers, supply and demand, crop acreage, will come clear again from the USDA in its reports, being released at 11 o'clock, just a little less than an hour from now. Not to pile on with more pessimism here, Dan, but on the policy side, the latest announcement on the renewable fuel standard, frankly, has riled up the feed grain sector.
Yes, you've got the EPA's set of decisions on the renewable fuel standard, particularly with regard to the part of that that RFS, or renewable fuel standard, that would affect corn and grain sorghum, i.e. the feed grain side, was pretty much left unchanged. And that in itself was an issue causing consternation for the ethanol industry and supporters of the ethanol industry that grow corn and or grain sorghum. What they were looking for, the supporters of those commodities, was some type of a move by the EPA to address the waivers that small ethanol plants had gotten from being forced to use ethanol in their fuel mixes. So given that those waivers weren't announced by the EPA, then you had a lot of negative response. So what it comes down to is how many bushels of corn and or grain sorghum are we going to use in ethanol production, and to the degree that waivers granted by the EPA reduce the amount of ethanol production that's needed, then we use less corn. And right now, given our low price situation, that's just one more negative bit of news that causes those looking for higher prices to have frustration.
Well, that's just the stark reality of it. It's a struggle to find anything upbeat to give these markets any kind of a boost right now, and will be for the foreseeable future, it would sound, Dan.
You know, I am not convinced that we are out of the window where we need to be concerned about the size of this crop. You look at the weather maps and what we have for soil moisture, both at the root zone and at the surface, and we have some overly wet and some overly dry areas that are pretty important, and particularly running from Missouri through parts of western Illinois and Iowa and parts of Kansas on the dry side, then to the north of that up towards the Iowa-Minnesota border to northwest Iowa, good chunk of Nebraska being too wet. So we'll see how it all works out, but again, it's the narrative consensus basically deems that there's no threat to the crop. And we've got all of July and August to get through before we can answer that question conclusively.
Very well, then. And Dan, we always appreciate your input. We'll catch up with you next Friday. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
He joins us right here each week to talk grain market trends, does K-State Research and Extension grain market economist Dan O'Brien, along with us from his office in Colby, northwest Kansas. You are listening to Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
You're listening to Agriculture Today. Well, a group of crop production specialists from the College of Agriculture here at K-State have taken turns the last 3 weeks helping public and private school science teachers from around Kansas become well acquainted with what goes into the production of soybeans. This was the 2018 Summer Soybean Science Institute at K-State, now in its 7th year. 19 teachers will graduate from that institute later today. This program supported in large part, by the way, by the Kansas Soybean Commission. The idea is that these teachers will take what they've learned about plant science in general and soybeans in particular back to their classrooms this fall and will work that information into their teaching routinely. K-State crop entomologist Brian McCornack is among the leaders of this initiative, which directly introduces teachers to the science of soybeans, the biology, the physiology, the whole gamut from seed to pod set and beyond.
My favorite part of this institute is really giving teachers a chance to learn what scientists do, and the great part is we get to use a model system like soybean to do it. We bring them in for 3 weeks. Oftentimes, first couple days, deer in headlight look. What are we going to be doing with soybean for 3 weeks? And then usually by the end of the week, they're completely excited about soybean, what it does, why it's there, how we use it, and really all the science that goes into it. So this originally started as a United Soybean Board grant out of Nebraska. Dr. Tiffany Hengmoss approached me and said, we're starting this new program. We've got some funds to expand it to Kansas. Are you interested? And I said, yes. And at that time, the next generation science standards were really starting to roll out. And what was really interesting is that, a model system like soybean, when you bring that into a classroom, really allows the teacher to use it across everything they teach. From, think about math, well, how much really is an acre, and how do I understand where that acre is within a state? Now links to geography. And then social studies, again, what do we eat? What's in our food? Where does that come from? How's that produced? All these questions that they start asking. Again, it's kind of difficult to do that with a lima bean. Sure, you can talk about growth and development, but when you replace that bean with a soybean and realize that that's a really important commodity to our state, to me that was a no-brainer to jump on board.
Brian has been involved with this program from the outset, and it has become evident via feedback from previous participants that this endeavor is paying off in conveying knowledge about agricultural science to the next generation.
And this kind of goes back to really why I do this program is their complete awe and fascination what growers really, soybean growers in this case, what they really go through on a year-to-year basis. They have at least a better appreciation. They might not understand, of course, all the decisions that go into soybean production, but realizing that there's a lot that really does go into it, and being able to understand, the science, and then put that into practice, and then be able to expect to get some yield at the end of that, to be able to pay for all those inputs, and then, oh, by the way, put my kid through college. All those types of decisions really happens from the time they select the seed, and I think that's as a learning. That's what this institute also provides, and they're bringing that experience and knowledge now to their classrooms. Where, I keep challenging my teachers. I just need one of you to give me the next Norman Borlaug. I need one of your students to be inspired by agriculture and to pursue a career in this. And for the teachers to see that in something like soybean, a farmer is very instrumental in that. But it's a team sport. There's a lot of different roles, from a scientist to we see technicians here helping out. The breeders, the meteorologists, you name it, soil system specialists. They all play an important role. But it's together that they can make that happen.
So, what sorts of inspiring things are teachers doing to pass along what they've learned at this institute to their students? It can be quite simple to growing a soybean seed, sticking it in a plastic bag and getting them to see what does the word germinate mean. And our approach is not so much here's the activity, do it, and then learn something. It's really more about getting them to explore. So what we really teach in the institute is this inquiry piece, which is, okay, I'm going to give you something to look at, but from that, what are you curious about? Realizing that science is curiosity-driven, evidence-based, we really take them through the science and engineering practices to help them really understand what a scientist does. And that's kind of tricky for teachers. A lot of them want to give the answer. They don't want to see the student struggle a little bit. So to model that, we kind of make the teachers struggle a little bit early on to really get their investigative, inquisitive minds going. And a lot of times I'll just start simply with a soybean drawing. I'll give them a soybean plant, they start drawing it, and then they're really fascinated by really the hundreds of questions that come from simply looking at, again, something they might take at face value, but be more inquisitive about simply by, again, drawing and looking and fascination. And what Brian and his team are looking for is creating a prolonged impact on school science teachings. Now, the success of this institute, in fact, has inspired other companion initiatives.
I could go into a classroom and work with those students and, get them to be, oh, that was really great for one day. But these students are with those teachers all year. And so for us to be able to work with those teachers, that's why it's not a 3-week institute for kids, because we're really trying to empower those teachers to be those leaders, to be inspirational, to say, hey, it's a soybean plant, and it's got, it's in 60 to 70% of the products that you purchase. It's a really valuable commodity, but at the end of the day, it's really interesting. It's intriguing by the way it grows and the things that affect it or don't affect it. And that's why it takes the 3 weeks to give those teachers some confidence, some practice. And it's not just a 1 or 2 day workshop and hopefully they've learned something. This has really been transformative. Usually by the end of 3 weeks, you'd think, okay, I'm done, ready to be done, but a lot of them want more. And that's actually now stemmed into a partnership with Kansas Corn Commission, where we take those teachers that have been through the 3-week Summer Institute and to bring them through now what we're calling a mentorship program, realizing that the most impact that we could have is teachers working with other teachers. Getting those other teachers that might be, again, just as hesitant as they were when they started the Soybean Institute to bring that into their classroom, but working with other teachers in their schools, and the Corn Commission has been supporting that effort. So now we've got 2 commission groups in Kansas that are working together on educational initiative. Honestly, I venture to say that's not happening anywhere else, at least on the level that we're seeing here. And that's really through those partnerships that, K-State is helping between these 2 commissions, and the support that they're providing teachers is phenomenal. It's phenomenal.
K-State crop entomologist Brian McCornack there. Now, among those 19 teachers who are wrapping up their 3-week participation, Patty Gould. She's a 3rd-grade teacher in the Buhler School District in Reno County. What attracted her to this program?
I knew I needed to do something with my science program at school, and so it intrigued me. I have worked with the new science standards. As a teacher, I needed to refreshen what I've been doing, and so that's the reason why I signed up, and I am extremely excited. I cannot wait to begin these things. In fact, the way that we have been developing lesson plans and the experience, anytime someone wonders something in our classroom, it sparks an experiment, and we're constantly doing it. So having the information that is presented to us and the things that we're taking away. One of the things from the Kansas Soybean group that we were able to receive through this has been these microscopic lenses that we put on our iPods that we also got. And so taking those pictures and just dwelling ourselves into it, not only were we able to really see how these plants work, we were able to get ideas that we can take back and use in our classroom.
And Patty is hoping that this approach to teaching science through soybean knowledge will spark long-term interest in agriculture among her students.
We may bring out these learners that need to go into this field. This might tweak, their excitement to say, hey, this is where I want to follow. And the agricultural field is huge, and it's a huge part of our community. And even if they're a town kid, getting excited might have them later on out on the field. I am excited to get into my room and see where I can take this and what my students will obtain from it. It's been a great joy to be here.
Patty Gould, a 3rd-grade teacher from Buhler, again among the 19 teachers who are completing today the 3-week Summer Soybean Science Institute here at Kansas State University. This outreach program sponsored by the Kansas Soybean Commission. If you'd like to know more about what all went into this, go to the Commission's website, kansassoybeans.org. This is Agriculture Today. Now we'll stand aside for these next few moments and then be back with today's Kansas Wheat Harvest Update, the Kansas Wheat Scoop, and Mary Knapp on Kansas agricultural weather. All of that still to come here on the K-State Radio Network. Please keep it right here.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Agriculture Today is back now. Eric Atkinson here, and time for another update on wheat harvest progress in Kansas, and this time centered on the north central part of the state and the Post Rock Extension District that is made up by 5 counties: Smith, Jewell, Osborne, Mitchell, and Lincoln counties. And the Extension crop production agent serving that district with us now, Sandra Wick. Well, Sandra, the weather interruptions are likely behind your producers now. Are they back in the fields cutting?
Yep, they're gearing up. We've had 2 to 3 pretty full days of wheat harvest weather. So I know that puts the producers in a little bit better mood, that they can get that out of the field and move on to their next adventure.
So you cover quite a territory, those 5 counties. It may be hard to pull this together, but how far along is harvest? How near completion might it be?
Okay, well, we'll kind of divide it up in 2 parts. Kind of the southern part, which is the Lincoln-Mitchell counties. Lincoln County is, as you would guess, is about 90% completed. You know, they had some interruptions with some rain. Mitchell County is probably about 75 to 80%. Move up in the northern tiers, Jewell, Osborne, Smith, we're probably 25, 30%. You know, they were just kind of gearing up and starting, and then we got that rain, which was much needed for our other crops. But now the last 2 or 3 days, they're right in the field getting some things done.
And you have a better handle on the southern tier of counties, but what are yields and test weights looking like? What kind of numbers are you hearing?
Okay, well, it seems to me that in the southern part of the district, which Lincoln-Mitchell, they received the more timely rains when we needed to for that wheat crop. So the yields that I've heard coming in is 30s to 50s. And, you know, the higher yielding is in the summer fallow ground, and it's really showing up this year just because of the drought. In the northern tier of the district, we just didn't get the rain up here. You know, it's such spotty rains, and so the yields are anywhere all over the board. 15 to maybe 40 bushel. So it's not quite as optimistic up here, but they're still getting her done.
So are your test weights wide-ranging as well then?
The test rates at Dev actually stayed pretty constant. You know, before the rain started, they were pretty good, 60, 61, and now, you know, with the rain, it's dropped off. Mm-hmm. But they're still holding around 58 to 59, so that's a good sign. And
any reports on protein content and whether we're seeing higher numbers there?
Okay, well, as you could guess, with lower yields, it tends to bring the higher protein. Mm-hmm. So they're staying strong, 12 to 14%. So in that regard, it's a good thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Then, Sandra, is the crop exceeding what your producers thought it would likely turn out to be?
I think so, Eric, because, you know, 2 or 3 months ago, it was pretty gloom and doom for that wheat, and then we got some moisture. So I think you could guess it was probably a little bit better than they expected. And like I said, they can't put a general thing on it. It goes from field to field just because of the spotty rain that we received. So it's wherever Mother Nature dropped that moisture is where the good yields are.
Yeah. And were there any specific complications with harvest to the moment anyway, or has it gone relatively smoothly?
It's gone relatively smoothly, except, you know, for the, you know, we did have the rains, and so that's bringing a lot more of the weeds on. So, you know, when I was talking to some of the elevators, you know, a lot more dockage maybe is coming in. So, you know, that 2 or 3 months ago when these producers had to make that decision to go on and put more money into that crop and, you know, go on and put their herbicide on, some of them chose not to, and I can certainly understand that. But the ones that did, you can really see that a drastic difference. There's clean fields versus, you know, those weeds are really starting to come with the moisture.
And wanted to ask about any varieties that are standing out in the 5-county area as you look at this year's crop performance.
Okay. I really haven't heard any specific yields. Now, I know, you know, last year when they were doing variety selection, a lot of them went with the Greenfield, Monument. You know, those are kind of the ones that kind of stuck out. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, evaluating those varieties to see how they measured up against the drought. So it'll be a good test this year.
Well, hardly a bumper crop, but a decent crop. That's the characterization, it sounds, Sandra.
I think so. So, and like I said, they can get this out and then move on. You know, we've got some moisture, some pretty good moisture up here recently. So, you know, I think they're fairly optimistic for the corn, the milo, and the soybean crop.
Which is the other part of the story that's much more favorable with those rain delays in the wheat harvest. So, Sandra, thank you for the comments.
Great. Thanks a lot, Eric.
Sandra Wick is the crop production extension agent serving the Post Rock Extension District, that being Smith, Jewell, Osborne, Mitchell, and Lincoln counties in the north central part of the state. Now it's on to this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop with Marcia Boswell. Marcia?
In response to a U.S. Department of Commerce Section 232 investigation into automobile and auto parts imports, U.S. Wheat Associates once again expressed concern about using questionable national security arguments as a basis for import restrictions and the potential for retaliation from trading partners. In comments on the investigation submitted June 22nd, U.S. Wheat Associates strongly encouraged the Commerce Department to stick to serious national security concerns when using Section 232. Before any restrictions on automobile and auto parts imports are taken under Section 232, U.S. Wheat Associates said Commerce should consider the fallout if other countries follow suit and impose restrictions on U.S. wheat or other products as a result of their own national security concerns, whether real or imagined. U.S. Wheat Associates was among the first agricultural organizations to publicly oppose the use of Section 232 to impose tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. Farmers have already been hit hard by tariffs on hundreds of food and agricultural products in retaliation for recent unilateral trade actions, and much more is expected soon. While the reactions of countries to U.S. steel and aluminum protectionism has been negative for farmers, U.S. Wheat Associates said the case of automobiles is much more dangerous because the dollar figures are so much larger. In its comments, U.S. Wheat Associates said automotive imports in 2017 were about 10 times larger than steel imports, and much of this came from significant wheat importers like Mexico, Japan, South Korea, and the European Union. The chances that U.S. wheat farmers will face retaliation increases substantially if the final measures reflect the scope of the investigation. U.S. Wheat Associates stated whatever surface-level plausibility existed for justifying restriction on steel and aluminum imports is entirely absent when it comes to automobiles. The only plausible reasons for this action are either economic protectionism in violation of our WTO commitments or a negotiating tactic. Use of this statute as a negotiating tactic is an abuse of the authority granted by Congress, and economic protection is available through trade remedy laws if the need for protection meets the requirements of the relevant statutes. In either case, the Department of Commerce should find that these imports do not threaten national security. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Many thanks, Marcia, and you're listening to Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today 800-321-3276 or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. Agriculture Today comes to a close now with a glance to Kansas agricultural weather. Our weekly visit with Research and Extension climatologist at K-State, Mary Knapp. Regrettably, Mary, the milder weather we enjoyed for a fair spell there has surrendered to summer heat. And how?
Right. Let's do a quick recap of the week ending on Tuesday, because that's what goes into our drought monitor product. And it was wet and it was cool for the first time in recent weeks.
That's up to Tuesday.
Just to remind people. We saw statewide average temperatures of 72.5 degrees, which was 3 degrees cooler than normal, and every division averaged cooler than normal temperatures. So that was very, very welcome. Not surprisingly, the garden spot of the state, Northwest Kansas, continued to lead the trend. They were averaging 68.2 degrees, and that was 5 degrees cooler than normal. Southeast, not quite so far off of their normal. They averaged 75.1, which was 1.3 degrees cooler than normal.
Seems like a distant memory.
Yeah, a very, very distant memory. We can throw in that it was a wet week for most of the state during that time period. And not surprisingly, that southeast corner, which stayed on the warm side, was also the area that saw less of the rainfall. And again, that goes through Tuesday. The front pushed through and reached parts of the southeast later in the week, but still, statewide, we averaged just over 2 1/3 inches, and that was 275% of normal, which has been a long time since we've been able to say that we were that far ahead. Some of the big winners, north central and west central Kansas, should mention that while they were the winners as far as the overall totals go, they also had some flooding to go along with those heavy rains. Right. The Northeast Division actually did do fairly well also, and they averaged almost 3 inches of rain, and that was about 4 times what we would normally expect during the week.
Mm-hmm. Now, you do have collectively the growing season precipitation numbers for Kansas. That's back to the early part of April. That's instructive information.
Right, and we are doing a little bit better. We were looking abysmal just a week ago, but we are up to an average of 8.79 inches, which is 86% of normal. Surprisingly, the north central and northeast are both above normal in those categories. And again, for those of us in the Manhattan area, we'll go, what? How could we be above normal? But again, that is the divisional average, and there were parts of the northern stretches of northeast Kansas that saw more than we did. And indeed, there are still flood watches along the Missouri River in eastern Kansas.
What is the drought monitor telling us now, Mary?
Well, reflecting that switch in conditions, there have been reductions in the area of drought coverage in north central, northwest, and west central Kansas. Some improvement in the categories in the southwest, south central, and parts of the central. But in east central and southeast, where they haven't been favored as much and they are more likely to have higher precipitation totals, there was deterioration in those areas. And so we kind of improved in the west and went downhill a little bit in the east to reflect the conditions. Unfortunately, given our dry, windy weather that we're experiencing right now, given the fact that at this time of the year we are supposed to get quite generous moisture, we're going to see some further deterioration, I would expect, in the east central, central, and southeast in this next week.
Well, what is ahead? We've another shot at moisture tomorrow into tomorrow night, they're saying, and then we're going to be stuck in this heat wave, if you will, and dryness for a time?
The 8 to 10 outlook for both temperature and precip are not particularly favorable. We are looking at continued warmer than normal temperatures for that time period, and we are also looking at below normal precipitation, and that is statewide on the precip. So, yes, that won't be very promising. Corn producers that had their corn silk and tassel in the cooler weather are going to be much happier than those whose corn is in that reproductive stage right now as we speak. We should note that one of our problems has been elevated nighttime temperatures, which creates more stress not only for the crops but also for livestock. Probably our only beneficial note, if we could mention that, would be the fact that it has been fairly windy. Not so good for crops because that has increased evaporative demand, but much less stressful for confined livestock operations.
The forecast for the entire month of July has also now been issued. Does it offer a break sometime, say, mid to late July at all?
Well, they don't really give it by periods during the month. They give it for the month in its entirety. And the outlook, as they call it, is for an increased chance of warmer than normal temperatures. That doesn't mean that we'll continue our current warm pattern through the entire month because, indeed, we're going to be so top-weighted at the beginning of the month with hot weather, that we could go into cool pattern to end the month and still come out hotter than normal. Looking at our rainfall, the outlook for that is equal chances for above or below normal precip. So we could, again, see the pattern that we saw in June, where we had a dry start to the month but a very wet end. They are looking for an active monsoon in the southwest, which would be favorable for us because that generally brings a little bit of moisture our way, particularly in the southern stretches of the state. Another favorable outlook that they are talking about is they have issued an El Nino watch. Mm-hmm. El Nino, of course, as our listeners know, is warmer than normal waters in the Pacific that changes storm track patterns, and that tends to favor wetter conditions for us in the fall, and we would certainly welcome that.
That may be the best news of all if El Nino would, in fact, come together to grace our weather situation here in Kansas. And as always, Mary, thanks for coming over.
Thanks, Eric.
From the Weather Data Library at K-State, Research and Extension climatologist Mary Knapp right there. And we appreciate you tuning in. Please enjoy your weekend, won't you? Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.